According to police, Makuey fled the scene in blood-stained clothes. Police tracked him down at his home, located not far from the crime scene.
Somebody got in the house and attacked me and my husband, and I'm all bloody, and I'm an old woman.
I don't know. Okay, I really don't know for murder, but I'm assuming that's what it's for, because that's what interrogation is.
There are certain things about Ngor Makuey that were completely bizarre. On July 2nd, 2014, he was arrested for breaking and entering, as well as the assault of an elderly couple. Ngor's family and even the people in his community were struggling to come to terms with the fact that someone so seemingly normal could do such a terrible thing. There has always been a running theme of mothers trying to claim that their sons are innocent, but in this case, well, there was no denying the cold hard truth. But what really happened in the lovely couple's home? And was Ngor the perpetrator, or was he actually innocent, as his mother claimed? This is a full breakdown on the life of Ngor Makuey, the teen who was caught on body cam while escaping murder. The case kicks off in a small, quiet community in Des Moines, Iowa. The morning of July 2nd, 2014 started off just as any other day for 97-year-old Rupert Anderson and his 94-year-old wife, Harriet Anderson. But the couple's seemingly tranquil day came to an abrupt end when Rupert and Harriet were attacked in their own home. Sadly, Rupert succumbed to his injuries while his wife luckily survived. Harriet and Rupert Anderson owned a thriving kennel business called Vista Kennels. They were known as the most generous and humble people anyone could meet. After this couple was brutally attacked in their own home, it left the community in ruins. What made the crime even more baffling was the involvement of a 19-year-old teenager named Ngor Makuey. Added to that, he had no previous criminal history, so that made the case even more puzzling. As more details of this case came to the surface, the shocking nature of the crime would leave everyone completely horrified. Ngor Peter Makuey appeared to be a quiet person who often kept to himself. Born in an Ethiopian refugee camp, his parents knew that the environment was too toxic to raise their children. They were also able to gain refugee status and escape to the US, where they hoped to build a better life for their family. Of course, this drastic move was hard on everyone in the family, especially little Ngor. Moving from state to state in hopes of finding a place to settle, the family began to drift apart. This eventually led to Ngor's parents separating and seeking different employment opportunities. While much is not known about his dad, Ngor's mom remarried and has a lot to say about her son's conviction, but more on that later. The former Mrs. Makuey met and fell in love with a man named Jinub Reith. Just as every single mother dreams, Ngor and his stepfather seemed to get along. In fact, Jinub described Ngor as a kind-hearted, peaceful child who was caring towards his 5 younger siblings. Despite his rough start to life, Ngor was, by all appearances, a stable, quiet child. He rarely showed the regular mood swings, anxiety, and teenage angst that we all expect from anyone in that age range. He was very active and an ambitious young man who played basketball and ran track for his school, Southeast Park High School. Ngor had dreams of becoming an artist or computer technician, but he threw that all away in an instant. If I'm being honest, this does not sound like the description of an impulsive killer. It kind of sounds like the beginning of a hero's origin story. This is exactly why the small community was left in utter disbelief and pure disgust when the details of this crime came out. But Ngor wasn't always the victim, and he seemed to have a darker side to him. During the trial, it came out that he was hiding under another personality from his family. Ngor has a YouTube channel where he posted his self-written rap videos under the name Young God. These videos always displayed some form of violence and had quite explicit language. This YouTube channel raised a lot of suspicion about his personality. As the public and investigators looked into Ngor's online activities, there was a strange connection. Authorities discovered that he spent a lot of time browsing online articles and ads looking for male models on the morning of the attack. He was also reading about the tragic fate of Lil Jojo. For those who don't know, Joseph Coleman, known by his street name Lil Jojo, was a young Chicago rapper who had beef with Chief Keef. Lil Jojo's gangster was tested, which led to him being unsliced in a shooting. Investigators then claimed that Ngor went on to a news website that detailed many of the city's homicides. These little glimpses into Ngor's internet paper trail raised questions about him. Many wondered about his intentions, since he he fed his mind with so many violent things. Another thing in question was his state of mind leading up to the crime. This senseless act of violence was completely unprovoked, and there was no clear motive. So, what do we know? What happened to the Andersons? Did Ngor give a reason? Ngor being at the crime scene was extremely suspicious. Usually people don't hang around a place where they know they can get in trouble. What made his presence at the crime scene even more out of the norm was that there was absolutely no apparent motive for being there, let alone for the crime itself. The police discovered that there was no connection between Ngor and the Andersons. As we mentioned before, he had no criminal history, which left investigators even more puzzled as to what could have led him to commit such a heinous act. Ngor's parents were not any different from a lot of parents out there who want to believe the best in their children, so they were adamant about their son's innocence, stating that they had never even seen him get into trouble with anyone before. Now, as we mentioned before, the Andersons were enjoying a regular day when things took a turn for the worst on that fateful evening of July 2nd, 2014. The loving couple lived across the street from Ngor's family home. This means that they likely watched him and his siblings grow up, which makes the following events all the more chilling. On that seemingly normal evening, Ngor made his way across the street and broke into the Andersons' home. From the moment he entered the door, he began his vicious attack on the couple. When Ngor got inside, he used anything he could get his hands on to brutally assault Rupert and Harriet. It was later discovered that the weapon of choice was a metal spatula.
Somebody got in the house and attacked me and my husband, and I'm all bloody, and I'm an old woman.
Ngor used that otherwise harmless object to assault both Harriet and Rupert, ending Rupert's life altogether. Naturally, when the news of this case broke, everyone in the community was completely confused. Not only was there no apparent link between Ngor and the couple, but there seemed to be no motive at all for why he did this. As the mystery unfolded, friends and family of the Andersons started grasping at straws to get to the bottom of this mystery. What Ngor didn't count on was the fact that Harriet survived the assault. Thankfully, she was able to reach out for help and put an end to her attacker's senseless reign of terror. Unsurprisingly, he tried to play dumb and acted as though he had no clue what was going on. Harriet Anderson, in a desperate plea for help, managed to call 911 after being brutally beaten. Her voice was trembling and with pure pain and fear. She began recounting the horrifying ordeal to the Des Moines Police Department dispatcher. She explained that an intruder had entered their home and attacked both her and her husband. She emphasized that she was an old lady and she needed help as soon as possible. But this wasn't the first notification officers received about this break-in. Rupert wore a life alert bracelet, and during the chaos of everything going on, he pressed the button. This sent a call to the Des Moines Department, making it known that there was an issue with Rupert. Shortly after, dispatchers received the call from Harriet, but that first call dropped. Realizing there was definitely something wrong in that home, they called back immediately. After talking with Harriet and learning the grisly details of the attack, the dispatcher asked if she needed an ambulance.
They beat these people in the head and they're like 100 years old.
Somebody come. I need help.
In desperate need for anyone to come to their aid, Harriet can be heard pleading for help. Of course, the dispatcher told Harriet to stay on the line, but she hung up about 2 minutes later. Now it can be assumed that she hung up to call her grandson because of what she said next. When the dispatcher called her again, she asked them to call her grandson and gave the dispatcher his number. Now, the exact conversation the dispatcher had with her grandson is not known, but we can assume that the entire ordeal was spelled out to him. Fortunately, Harriet was able to get medical care, but her husband would not be that lucky. He suffered a fatal blow to the head that caused him to pass away. During this time, you'd think that he had already fled the scene and was working on his speedy escape, but that could not be further from the truth. When the police arrived at the scene, they were met with an unexpected guest. That was Ngor Makuey. The suspect killer was calmly lingering near the front of the crime scene. In a strange twist of fate, the police unknowingly captured their perpetrator on body cam footage at the crime scene. As they usually do for protocol, officers recorded themselves entering the Andersons' home. Ngor can be seen standing outside the front door, wearing a white hoodie and a red t-shirt. He appeared to be scarily calm and collected. He simply stood by and observed as the officers entered the crime scene. This would later be the most crucial piece of evidence that would later contribute to building the case against Ngor. Officers immediately launched an investigation into the brutal home invasion of this sweet old couple. Just as before, the authorities struggled to uncover a motive for the crime. They dug through the mountain of evidence and were still coming up empty in their search for a reason. At this point, even Ngor's family was puzzled because they knew that he usually kept to himself. This means that there was an extremely small chance of him ever even speaking to the Andersons. Basically, he would not have even known they existed if he did not live across the street from them. With no apparent motive and a suspect on their radar, the detectives meticulously combed through evidence and stumbled upon the weapon used for the heinous crime. As we mentioned before, he used a metal spatula to brutally hit the couple. Rupert was so badly assaulted that his cause of death was identified as being a direct result of violence. Harriet was comparatively lucky to be alive, but her life would never be the same. Later, officers who were not at the crime scene saw a man matching the description of the suspect. They arrested the man and placed him in front of the patrol car, only to later realize that they had the wrong man.
Yeah, that's not it.
You know, that he may have continued into Altoona if that was the right track. He may have been ahead of this guy.
You know what's funny is I initially came over here and we're thinking he wouldn't have made it this far already.
This put the officers back at square one, but they were in for a shock. What the officers didn't know was that their perpetrator was waiting for them. This, coupled with Ngor's calm demeanor and the absence of a previous criminal record, made this a complex case. But there was no doubt in anyone's mind that he was the attacker. As the trial kicked off, both the prosecution and defense had a chance to present their arguments. The prosecution painted a grim but factual picture of the events that occurred on that fateful night. They emphasized the senselessness of Rupert Anderson's death and the severity of Harriet Anderson's injuries. To further cement their argument, they presented photographs of the couple to the judge. Highlighted was the blood-stained phone that Harriet used to get help. There was also the metal spatula, both of which were a chilling reminder of the violence inflicted upon the Andersons. The prosecutors also used Ngor's previous YouTube videos to contradict claims that he was legally insane at the time of the attack. They argued for him to have the ability to write and perform these songs, he had to have some form of understanding. That meant that he was more than likely fully aware of what he was doing when he broke into the Andersons' home. On the other hand, the defense tried to build a case of insanity for Ngor. They claimed that he was legally insane at the time of the murders. In an effort to back up their claims, Ngor was examined by a Mount Pleasant psychologist, Dr. Louis Rossell. As the defense's only witness on Ngor's mental state, Dr. Rossell testified that the young man suffered from visual and auditory hallucinations. This included his belief that there were creatures who controlled his body and made him harm the Andersons. The defense team attempted to build a case around this alleged legal insanity at the time of the attack. They aimed to prove that he could not fully understand the consequences of his actions and did not know the difference between right and wrong. But this claim was shaky at best because the prosecution had already made their case with the piles of evidence presented that challenged it. Ngor's ability to create and upload music videos on YouTube contradicted claims of mental impairment. It was assumed that he was fully aware of what he was doing at that point in time and could clearly tell the difference between right and wrong. The insane claim was also debunked by a well-known psychiatrist, Dr. Michael Taylor. He examined Ngor and said that his hallucinations were scientifically preposterous. In fact, Dr. Taylor stated that Ngor claimed to see a green man with 4 arms who was in control of his body. The trial progressed and the community fought with the internal dilemma of whether or not he was criminally insane. Could he tell right from wrong when he attacked the Andersons? Not gonna lie, the varied findings of the psychologists did not make this any easier. With there still being no clear motive, everyone was truly stumped. Ngor's mother was called to testify, and she tried to paint her son as a traumatized young man who didn't know any better.
Did it worry you that Ngor talked to himself? Yes.
The defense tried to run with this story, but because they could not get a solid timeline of how long Ngor spent in Ethiopia, there was no way to tell if it had actually affected him. After looking at all of the evidence and arguments presented, the judge presiding over the case was left with the difficult decision of giving a verdict. Now, this was a bench trial, which meant that the judge would ultimately decide if he was guilty or innocent.
I do think it's important to recognize the family members that a separate punishment should be imposed, the fact that there were 2 victims of assault.
This case reminds you that you can never truly tell someone's intentions. There can be darkness lurking within even the most ordinary looking individuals. The bizarre details of the crime, from Ngor's secret online activity to him being at the crime scene, continue to fascinate and disturb everyone who hears about this case. Everyone waited on the edge of their seats to hear the decision, all in the hopes that some form of closure would be given to the Anderson family. While everyone waited on the verdict, the courtroom was so silent you could hear a a pin drop. As the lengthy trial drew to an end, the judge found Ngor Makuey guilty of assault with intent to commit serious injury, burglary, robbery, and first-degree murder. In January 2016, when he got to the age of 20, he was sentenced to life in prison. Naturally, the case left a lasting impact on the community, raising a lot of questions about the nature of violence and how complex the human mind can be. Of course, the community let out a breath of relief as this dangerous person was put behind bars. Still, they were left with the lingering shock that someone who seemed so harmless could do something so terrible. Naturally, his family maintained his insanity to the very end. They held firm in their belief that he could not do something so violent. And even if he did, they thought that he was so traumatized from his childhood that there was no possible way he knew what he was doing. But the evidence was undeniable. On the other hand, the Andersons' relatives were able to see the person who took their loved ones from them. They got to see his mannerisms and the way he would try to defend his actions. Even so, they still did not get a reason as to why he did what he did. Unfortunately, this case has a bittersweet end, as Harriet passed away in March of 2015. Even so, her family can rest assured that the person who hurt their loved ones is locked away, and as long as he's behind bars, he can't hurt anyone else. In the aftermath of the attack, the community rallied together to support the Anderson family. Harriet and Rupert's legacy continues to live on through Vista Kennels, their well-known business, which continues to thrive despite the heartbreaking loss of its founders. The case of Ngor Makuey will forever serve as a cautionary tale. It forces us to reflect on the devastating consequences that can come out of immeasurable acts of violence. The case of Ngor Peter Makuey will always be one of the most mind-boggling cases in Des Moines history. The lack of a solid motive and the contradicting information about his mental state left many on the fence about whether or not he truly did this out of malicious intent. But what do you think? Was he truly hallucinating, or was that just a ploy to get him a lesser sentence? Leave a comment down below. Before you go, hit the like button, subscribe, and see you in our next deep dive.